Hello and welcome to Deep Dive Perspective Talks. I've got the honour of hosting Mick Wallace, former Member of Parliament for Europe and Ireland as well. So a man with a lot of experience of establishment, but always holding them to task and sticking to acts of justice, voice of justice, really. And that's a thing in itself these days, with so many politicians essentially selling out to big corporations and big business and to agendas which are never necessarily in the interests of the people. And I'm going to talk to him today about Iran, the war on Iran, the war that Israel committed to, and the one which America came in to essentially try and finish with a bombing of the nuclear facilities in Iran. Mick, welcome to the show. It's good to have you here.
Thank you.
You've been fighting tooth and nail, I know, for the oppressed in Palestine, and this, of course, is a related issue because the Iranians have been committed to the Palestinian cause ever since the Islamic Revolution out there. And it's all now culminated into a real violent spat, which has left much of Tel Aviv in rubble. Many would be clapping their hands in glee, saying that they've got a taste of their own medicine after what they've done in Gaza. But overall, a war between Israel and Iran, and certainly if America got involved, is not healthy for anybody in the world. What's your overview of what you've been seeing? And now that we've got the ceasefire in place, do you think that that's the end of it, or is there more to come?
Well, I don't think it's the end of it. I think the Israeli regime had been very keen to change the nature of Iran for a long time, as have the Americans. And what happened on June 13th with the sudden attack on Iran by Israel was obviously unlawful, but Israel had been itching to do it for a long time, and I suppose they figured that they would have, they were fairly comfortable that they'd have the backing of the US. I think it's important for people to remember that Israel is really a part of US empire. It's a huge military base in West Asia that the Americans used to try and develop hegemony in the region. They like to have everyone under their thumb, and sadly for them, Iran is not one of them. And Iran hasn't bent to the will of Western imperialism and hasn't bent to the will of US empire, and you pay a price for that. And Iran, things have been very difficult in Iran for a long time because of the sanctions. I'm sure it's a huge country anyway, and very diverse in many ways, like any country, and huge challenges. And things have been made a lot more difficult by the sanctions. I was there for a week just 4 weeks ago. An amazing country, amazing people, and it was horrific to think about the people not knowing whether they're going to be bombed or not. A lot of people were killed, and obviously the war didn't last that long. I'd say Israel would have planned on it lasting longer. I think they wanted to deal a tougher blow to Iran in the hope that it would put pressure on the people of Iran, to put pressure on the government in order to bring about regime change. But Israel didn't find things like they expected, and the barrage and the missiles that broke their so-called Iron Dome and created havoc in Tel Aviv, where schools, universities, workplaces closed down. while this was all going on. People spent most of their nights in shelters. It wasn't a very comfortable scene for them, and they wouldn't be used to it because they've been so well protected by US empire for so long. So it was a bit of a bloody nose for Israel. Obviously, we could talk forever about the fact that the international community in general were so weak about it. The Europeans were actually blaming Iran for being attacked by Israel. They are so pathetic at the moment. They don't actually have an independent foreign policy anymore, the UK or the EU, and that's hugely problematic in Europe at the moment. But that's a whole different area. But listen, the idea. Look, we had Iran illegally attacking. We had Israel illegally attacking Iran, and then the Americans come in with a so-called effort to wipe out their potential to create a nuclear weapon. But that actually was a lie. They know, as their own intelligence were only saying in March, they know that Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapon. They know that Iran isn't looking to develop one at the moment. Iran has been keeping the rules of the IAEA. Israel doesn't. Israel does have a weapon, doesn't allow inspections. And the Europeans are actually complaining about Iran possibly developing a nuclear weapon and never even talk about the fact that Israel has one. But when the Americans came in and dropped their B-2 bombs and then boasting that they wiped out Iran's potential to create a nuclear weapon, that's a lie as well. And they didn't. And there was bugger all serious damage done. But if anything is going to come out of this in the short term, is that Iran is going to have to consider the fact that if they want to be a sovereign country, and they do, national sovereignty means a lot to Iran. And if they want to be a sovereign country, they're probably going to have to consider developing a nuclear weapon, as they would be more safe if they had one. I don't see anyone attacking North Korea, no matter what they do, because they have a nuclear weapon. Now, I don't like nuclear weapons, and if we had a serious international community and if we had serious Europeans today, they would be looking for a nuclear-free zone in West Asia, but they're not doing that because they are subservient to the Zionist project, and that's very unfortunate. But the idea, if you ask me, is this going to end here? I don't think so. But I do think that Iran is stronger today than it was 3 weeks ago. And I think that's important. And I think Israel is weaker than it was 3 weeks ago.
Well, a fantastic overview. I mean, you've talked about something really touchy, because the idea of owning a nuclear weapon, you're right, North Korea haven't been threatened in the same way that Iran has. What do you think stops Ayatollah Khamenei giving the go-ahead? Because apparently he has a fatwa which says, look, we don't believe in the idea of a nuclear bomb because it's indiscriminate in the way it will kill. But do you think if the very identity and the sovereignty of Iran is threatened, do you think there's a possibility of Iran changing its stance on that?
Well, that's a big challenge for them. Look, only last year, the Iranians sat down with the Russians, and the Russians offered them a defense pact. And it would have involved Russia improving their air defense capability. But for Iran doing a deal with them, they would probably have seen it as a relinquishing of some of their independence as a sovereign nation. But if US empire is going to continue to barrage Iran and continue to make life difficult for them, continue with these horrific sanctions that kill the most vulnerable in Iran, not the best off, Iran is going to have to consider its position. And whether they like it or not, if they want to have sovereignty, they may have to compromise a little bit and have a stronger relationship with the likes of the Russians and the Chinese. In particular, I would say the Chinese. China, for me, is the future.
Well, you've got a point, because not more than a month or so earlier, Pakistan was attacked by India, a full-on military attack, and it was the Chinese air systems, radar systems, and the general integrated system that they've given to the Pakistani Air Force, which essentially allowed Pakistan to knock down something like 5 or 6 Rafales, even, state-of-the-art French aircraft. So that's the result of being tied into China. So I get that, but I know that the Iranians have their own systems like the Bavar and other defense mechanisms they perhaps thought that they could manage, but clearly there was a breach of Iranian airspace. But simultaneously, what do you think of the way Iran performed in terms of taking down the Israeli airspace? How do you think that panned out? Because it seems like Tel Aviv is pretty much rubble in many, many areas, vast areas.
Yeah, look at it. I mean, I wouldn't say that they've turned it into rubble. Missiles, they impact, they inflict individual pieces of damage on a city, and they created havoc in Tel Aviv. Did obviously a lot of damage, but if anyone thinks that Tel Aviv looks like Gaza today, that's not true, or anything like it. Gaza has been bombed to smithereens for 20 months, and Tel Aviv has only had missiles going in on it for about 12 days. It's a whole different scenario. But one thing about that is that the Iranians have shown that they produced some serious missiles, and they did so with their own scientists, their own technology. It's homegrown, and they are now excelling in the production of serious missiles. And, I'm anti-war, but I completely understand that Iran needs missiles to actually protect itself. Now, maybe they need more, and maybe they will have to also do some deals with the Russians and the Chinese in order to be safe. But having said that, look, they have shown that they can fight back. They have the capacity. Warfare has changed. There was a time, the Americans they spend more money, way more money than anybody else on arms for the last 50 years. Nobody spends as much money on military hardware as the Americans, but then America also happens to have dropped more bombs than everybody else since 1945. So we use them all the time. They've used their military prowess to establish and maintain financial dominance and be able to intimidate others so that for their own financial gain. And but they have, for example, a crazy amount of these massive aircraft carriers. But you know what? With the new technology, these can be a liability now. And for example, who would have believed that the Americans couldn't beat the Houthis in the Red Sea? Because Trump had to be practical, and he had to go to the Houthis for a deal because the Houthis were too problematic. And the Americans weren't able to beat them. And the Houthis don't have a fraction of America's military hardware. But things have changed. So countries like Yemen, countries like Iran do have the potential to make life more difficult for the big powers like US empire than before. And that's significant too. And it has to be said that Israel, that has been itching to attack Iran for years and years, Israel has no respect for international law, and it was always going to attack them whenever it felt like it. In the last 6 months alone, they've not only bombed Palestine back to the Stone Age, they've bombed Yemen, they've bombed Lebanon, they've bombed Syria, and now they've bombed Iran. But they got a bloody nose from Iran, and they will not feel quite so secure about doing this again. The Americans will be brazen enough to actually keep working towards regime change and making Iran an entity that they can manage and control for their own interest. But Iran will have taken strength from what went on in the last couple of weeks, and Iran is going to get stronger too.
Well, Loki's quite publicly said, and he's another campaigner like yourself for justice in the world. He said Iran has assumed the moral leadership of not just the Muslim world now with what it's done by standing up to Israel and the Americans, by bombing the American base, as well as taking the hits from Israel and giving the hits. It's almost like they're also being adopted as the champions of all those people who've seen the frustration and the agony of seeing children die, 100 kids plus die every day at the hands of an Israeli genocidal machine. Yet still, it seems as though the Zaya Western media and the politicians are still trying to play the old soft war game against Iran with Shia phobia, with Iranophobia, with sectarianism, with discussions about the plight of Iranian women, about the oppression and the subjugation, and about how it's a theocracy. There's a whole standard narrative around Iran, which it seems that the Anglo-Zionist Hasbara has certainly brainwashed people with around large parts of the world. Do you see that falling apart in this new phase? Do you think that will affect the way people think about Iran and how its battle with America might pan out in terms of the psyops and the psychological warfare?
Well, the Americans and the Europeans have weaponized human rights for a long time, and they were never in Europe. They were never tired telling us about European values. We had the former European Foreign Affairs High Representative Joseph Borrell telling us that Europe was a garden and the rest was a jungle. They have a colonial mindset still, and they're racist in their approach. And they think that they're better than others. We're civilized, and the rest of them are barbarians. That philosophy hasn't gone away. The idea, I spent 5 years in the European Parliament. The amount of motions that were lodged on behalf of, oh my God, Iran are terrible, they're clamping down on women's rights. Listen, if I was in Iran, I'd be looking for more rights too. But I'm also looking for more rights in Ireland. And I'd be looking for more rights if I was in America or Germany or France. I've never seen a government I like anywhere. But they have used human rights as a weapon for their own geopolitical ends. And if anyone actually thought that the European Union actually cared about the women in Iran who had to adhere to some religious rules, well, I'd like things to be more open in Iran about that. I think women should have the right to wear any head covering they want and not wear it if they don't want it. And I think that day is coming. And when I was there 4 weeks ago, most of the young women I've seen had no headgear on. And it isn't as draconian as it used to be. Listen, I wouldn't. I prefer if the religious community are not running any country, I would be in. But at the same time, I'm reluctant to tell others how to do things. Different cultures. Who are we to say that we're right and others are wrong? Who are we to say that we're the ones with the wisdom and do what we say or you're wrong? When the genocide in Gaza. Now, the genocide in Gaza started in 1948, and we didn't pay a whole lot of attention to it in that time. But when it accelerated after October 7th, over 20 months ago, Israel were killing Palestinian women every hour, every day, and children, and the European Union was silent. This is the European Union that cared about Iranian women because they had to wear headgear, and they didn't care about Israel dropping bombs and murdering Palestinian women. Do they actually care about Muslim women? Oh, yeah. No, they don't. It's a lie. It's a sham. And they have weaponized human rights in a terrible way.
So that's a really fascinating take, and something which I think a lot of Westerners won't have heard. But certainly you didn't hear the feminist movements and their hue and cry about the women being targeted in Palestine. I'd concur with you on that. I think moving on to also this lack of empathy within establishment. I'm not going to label the rest of Western society, but there's still a palpable desire to kind of not raise these things at the dinner table and not to talk too much about oppression. Ireland, I mean, where you live and the experience of the Irish with empire is not unfamiliar to the experience of, or not very different from the experience of what the global South would have experienced. Do you think that gives people like yourself and those people in Ireland an edge in terms of the way they view empire and what it's doing, and now it's particularly the settler colonialist project, what it's doing to Iran and what it's doing to Palestine and to Syria? Because they're not just in one place, are they? They've taken tracts of land in Syria. They're pushing for the Greater Israel scenario. That kind of settler colonialism is something which I would imagine the Irish balk at, but a lot of the European fraternity probably don't, not on the same level.
Well, first of all, listen, people are confusing the political class and mainstream media with the public. And you shouldn't do that. They're very different, right? In Ireland, for example, the public, as you said, are very sympathetic to the cause of the downtrodden. And Palestine has been a very clear case for the Irish. We haven't been quite as clear and understanding about other challenges across the world, and we haven't been as vocal about them, but we have been very good on Palestine. But I have to tell you that don't forget, our government, despite all their talk, are not good. And they're, as far as I'm concerned, they're no better than the other Europeans. Not one EU member state out of 27, not one EU member state has broken business links with Israel. And do you know who Israel's biggest trading partner in the EU is? It's Ireland. And we're only a small country, but we're the biggest trading partner for Israel in the European Union. And we have not broken business links with Israel. Now, we're talking about bringing in legislation for the last 7 years. It was proposed by a great woman called Frances Black, and she introduced legislation looking for a boycott of all goods coming from illegally occupied Palestine. Right, so any products coming from the West Bank and the illegal settlements, we wouldn't sell it in Ireland. The government have opposed it 100% for as long as they could, and now they're backing down a bit because the people are really angry about the fact that there's a genocide taking place for the last 20 months. We're watching it on our telephones and we're doing nothing about it. Our governments are doing nothing about it. The European Union has supported the genocide because it supports the Zionist settler colonial project that it began. And that hasn't changed. And the Irish government have refused to break business links with them as well. So loads of talk and no serious action. And there was a vote in the Irish Parliament only 6 weeks ago about the Irish Central Bank selling Israeli bonds. We're helping Israel raise money for their war effort so they can kill more Palestinians. And so other Europeans. They're a disgrace, the whole bloody lot of them. I mean, and now we're talking about, we might bring in this boycott of the Occupied Territories Bill, it's called. The boycott of goods coming from the West Bank and the illegal settlements. It just so happens, now, they didn't want to bring it in because they didn't want to be upsetting the likes of von der Leyen or the Israelis or the Americans. But there's a threat that might bring in a watered-down version of it now. But just remember that we're not doing any trading with the area, and it will not affect trade. I'd say maximum 1% of the 100% trade we're doing with them. It might affect 1%, if even that. So listen, we're still playing games with it, and we're still towing the line to Brussels, and Brussels is towing the line to Washington. The EU is a vassal state of US empire now, and Ireland is a vassal state of von der Leyen's club in Brussels, which are an absolute disgrace. And they are dragging the European Union in the wrong direction. And I would be very, very worried about the future of the EU at the moment, with gobshites like her making decisions.
The EU was certainly culpable when the JCPOA was unilaterally withdrawn from by Donald Trump, and that was Iran making a compromise on its nuclear issues and other things. And they promised in return to ease the sanctions, which have been strangling Iran, as you mentioned earlier on as well. So there were clearly lies that were done by the EU as well. And then they promised something called Instex, which was to create systems which would allow them to trade with Iran without the Americans, and they would still go ahead with the JCPOA. But then they dragged on that and nothing emerged in there. So it just seems to be that they are the ones who pulled out of treaties and deals, and it's the Iranians who constantly seem to want to come back to the negotiating table. But your suggestions, if you had a wish list of what the European Union and the West should do, I mean, I haven't touched on the Arab nations, and we know that most of them are equally as bad in terms of their stance, not only on the Western Empire or the Greater Israel Project, but also in terms of their relations with Iran. But what would be your recommendation? What would be your dream scenario if the EU and the West was to actually act on their supposed principles of, international rules-based orders in terms of human rights, in terms of peace, and creating a harmonious world? What would you want to see happen?
Well, first of all, just before we talk about the Europeans, in relation to the Gulf states, people need to remember that all those monarchies that you have in the Gulf area, they have been managed by the West. And the West has made sure that democracy didn't break out in those countries. The West that pretends to export democracy, which it doesn't, it's a lie. They have made sure that those countries don't have democracy. They have made sure that their people are downtrodden. You take a country like Jordan that are helping Israel commit a genocide. They were blocking Iranian missiles going to Israel. They have played 100% with Israel. But the people of Jordan are completely different. Well over 90% of the people of Jordan are on the side of the Palestinians. But their government is a puppet of Western powers. And so that's true of several of them. Now, the Europeans. Okay, what's the way forward? We had Mark Rutte from NATO boasting and sending Trump a message to say that we have them all in line, we're going to get them all to spend 5% of GDP on arms, defence spend from now on. Would you be well? 2% is too much. They were asked where the money had come from. I mean, they're literally talking about reducing public spending, reducing social welfare, reducing spend on education, reducing spending on health, reducing spend on public transport, reducing spend on tackling climate change in order to enrich the military-industrial complex. Have we lost the plot? This is nuts. When war broke out in Ukraine, now the Russians were wrong to invade Ukraine. It's a breach of the UN Charter. But the idea that it wasn't provoked is total nonsense. And we had Stoltenberg before us. We used to have Stoltenberg. We were on the Security and Defence Committee and the Foreign Affairs, and Stoltenberg would come in 2 or 3 times a year. He boasted and laughed about the fact that they provoked Russia into attacking Ukraine. He boasted about it, right? And this is a war that the Europeans didn't want to stop. And twice during the first year, and there's a Ukraine resolution every month, so they were losing the plot. They were wanting to give out about Russia every day. And Claire Daly and myself put in an amendment to the Ukraine resolution twice in the first year. And our amendment called on the EU to maximise its potential to commence dialogue and diplomacy with a view to ending the war and bringing about peace. Do you know that only about 5% of the MEPs voted for that? Over 80% voted against it twice. About 15% abstained. About 5% voted for it. So the MEPs, the members of parliament, elected by the people, were wanting the war to continue. And yet public opinion at that time showed that over 80% of the people, when asked in a huge survey carried out by an EU body itself, the European Council for Foreign Relations, and one of the main questions was, do you favour continuing to punish Russia or do you favour peace? There's over 80% of the people of Europe wanted peace. But the politicians want war. Because you know why? Because they don't represent the people. They represent financial interests. They represent vested interests. Our democracy is broken. Paid for media, power and money plays a huge influence in over who gets into the parliaments. It's not real democracy. So then you wonder, well, what are they doing? Now we become a war project. The EU is now a war project. And that has to change. The people need to take back control of how their countries are being run, how their communities are being run. We don't have real democracy at the moment. We don't have people working for peace. We don't have politicians in the European Union who are interested in dialogue and diplomacy. They actually prefer now to spend money on developing the military-industrial complex instead. It is plain as black and white that these people do not represent the people of Europe, and things have to change. And it will not be changed by politicians. It will be changed by the people. And unfortunately, for too long, they haven't been told the truth by mainstream media, which has been bought and sold by Western interests, mostly American. The people are slowly finding out the truth more about what's really happening across Europe and the world. I am still optimistic that things will change. And I'm looking forward to the day that the political class that we have across Europe will be out of a job and gone because they are a disaster.
Mick Wallace, thank you so much. I could carry on with this conversation and hopefully we'll get a chance to do it again and explore some of the issues which we weren't able to go into further detail, but a fantastic overview. Well, Mick's kind of said what we're all feeling, I guess, really. Nobody wants war. Nobody wants the Iranians to shut down the Hormuz Strait because they've been bombed by America or bombed by Israel because Israel happens to be paranoid about it not being able to continue a genocide. It seems that the powers that be here are pretty much out of control. If Keir Starmer, the EU, who we focused on today, are bought and sold by parasite elitists or are bought into American agendas, whoever you want to put the blame on, the reality is it doesn't seem as though they're doing what the people want. And it doesn't matter which government that comes into power, they all seem to end up doing the same. If here, for instance, we get reform coming in instead of Starmer, do you really think there'll be an anti-war set of politicians? I don't think so. It's really time, I think, everybody thought carefully about our governance systems and actually started maybe asking for some morality, some virtue ethics, some codes for politicians and for the links that they have with money mafias, the links they have with the media. There needs to be far more scrutiny, far more accountability, and there needs to be far more power to the people. How one does that, well, that's the challenge that I guess you and I have. These sort of platforms are where we can start airing these things. Certainly many, many more people are now aware of the fact that we're being played, and they might play us to the point where a Samson option, Israel's nuclear weapons, might be unleashed. And then what we're going to find is that that will not be restricted to the Middle East. It will come home to roost in our own countries, no matter how far we think we are from these war zones that have been going on for decades now. I'm afraid that the price is going to be paid by all of us if we're not careful. Thank you for watching this edition of Deep Dive Perspective. Do like, share and subscribe. And thank you again, Mick Wallace, for your time, coming on short notice to give us your insights.